A New Mexico Pueblo is using DNA testing to prove its ties to Chaco Canyon and DNA from people living around Chaco Canyon between 1300 and 1500 AD.
Deep beneath the sun-scorched dust of Chaco Canyon, inside a sealed stone chamber known only as Room 33, lay a secret that remained buried for 1,000 years. We were told the Anasazi were simple farmers who vanished into the wind, leaving only shadows in the cliffs. But the DNA tells a different story, a story of a hidden 3th-century dynasty, high-stakes ritual violence, and a continental power grid that rewrites human history. They didn't disappear. They were just waiting to be found. The bone vault of Room 33. This is like a scene out of a dark fantasy novel. So you're walking into a room that has been sealed for a millennium. A space so tight and claustrophobic that the air feels heavy with the weight of 1,000 years of silence. It's not from an Indiana Jones reboot. This is Room 33, located in the labyrinthine heart of Pueblo Bonito, the Pentagon of Chaco Canyon. This tiny, unassuming stone chamber held the most explosive secret in North American archaeology. When excavators first broke the seal in the late 1890s, they weren't just looking at a burial, they were looking at a treasure room that defied everything we thought we knew about the egalitarian Southwest. They did not just see the Anasazi, they found the literal architects of the empire. Resting in the dust were the remains of 14 individuals, but it was the sheer wealth draped over them that signaled something was different here. We're talking about more than 30,000 pieces of turquoise, pendants, beads, and raw stones, along with intricate shell ornaments transported from the distant Pacific coast. In any other context, this would be called a royal tomb. But for a long time, the official story was that these people were just simple communal farmers who shared everything. The discovery of Room 33 blew that narrative into the sun-bleached dirt. It suggested that there wasn't just a hierarchy in Chaco, there was an elite class that lived, breathed, and died in a world of unimaginable luxury, while the rest of the desert struggled to survive. For over a century, the mystery was, who were these people? Were they a rotating group of elected leaders, or perhaps powerful priests from different clans? The answer finally came in 2017, and it hit the scientific community like a seismic shift. Researchers extracted mitochondrial DNA from the remains in Room 33, and the results were unanimous. Every single person buried in that vault shared the exact same maternal lineage. This wasn't a group of peers, this was a dynasty. We are talking about a single family, specifically a female-led bloodline, that maintained an ironclad grip on the most powerful religious and economic hub in the Southwest for over 330 years. To put that in perspective, that is longer than the United States has been a country. Power wasn't seized by the strongest warrior or the most charismatic speaker, rewrites the entire power dynamic of the ancient world. It suggests a level of political stability and social stratification that we usually only associate with the great empires of Egypt or Rome. The DNA reveals that for 3 centuries, if you weren't part of this specific queen line, you weren't calling the shots in Chaco Canyon. They controlled the turquoise, they controlled the ritual calendar, and they controlled the labor of thousands of people who hauled massive timber logs from mountains 50 miles away just to build these great houses. Room 33 wasn't just a grave, it was the headquarters of a genetic corporate takeover that lasted 10 generations. But if these people were ruled by a single, elite family line for 3 centuries, where did that bloodline actually go when the fires started and the great houses were abandoned? Tracking the Great Migration. For years, history books leaned into the disappearance of the ancestral Puebloans, like it was some kind of X-Files mystery. They showed pictures of empty cliff dwellings and abandoned plazas, implying that an entire civilization simply walked into the desert and evaporated. It made for great TV, But the DNA evidence has finally turned that ghost story into a map of survival. By analyzing the genetic markers of the people from Chaco and comparing them to modern populations, scientists have uncovered what we now call the genetic ghost map. And it proves that the Chacons didn't vanish. They staged one of the most organized tactical retreats in human history. When you look at the genomic data, you see a clear, pulsating signal moving from the San Juan Basin toward the south and east. This wasn't a panicked flight of refugees. It was a deliberate, phased migration. The DNA signatures found in ancient skeletal remains are a 99% match for the modern Pueblo people of the Rio Grande and the Hopi Mesas. But here is the kicker. The DNA reveals that the move was actually a rebranding of their entire society. As they moved, they didn't just carry their DNA, they carried their social structure, but with a twist. The rigid, dynastic power of the turquoise lords was intentionally dismantled to prevent another collapse, yet the genetic core remained unbroken. The DNA also tells us about the sheer scale of the Chacan reach. By looking at the genetic diversity, or lack thereof, in certain burial sites, we can see that Chaco was a massive ingathering point. People weren't just living there, they were traveling hundreds of miles to marry into these lineages or to participate in the ritual economy. It was a genetic melting pot that stayed remarkably consistent for centuries. When the drought of 1276 hit, this ghost map shows us that they didn't just scatter randomly. They followed established genetic corridors to kin groups that had already settled in more water-stable regions. This brings up a wild realization. The people you see today at a traditional Pueblo feast day are the literal, biological continuation of the architects who built the most complex structures in North America. The truth that the DNA reveals is that the Chacuans are still here, and they've been holding the receipts this whole time. They didn't lose their civilization. They moved it to a safer neighborhood. But this raises a massive question. If they were just moving to better farmland, why did they feel the need to build a massive, perfectly straight supergrid of roads that seem to point toward things that aren't even there? If you think our modern highway system is impressive, you haven't seen the Chacoan supergrid. We're talking about over 400 miles of roads, some of them 30 feet wide, carved straight through the desert floor. But here's the shock factor that the DNA of the environment reveals. These weren't just footpaths for traders. Genetic and isotopic analysis of the massive timber beams used to roof the great houses shows that over 200,000 trees, mostly ponderosa pine and spruce, were hauled by hand from the Chusca and San Mateo mountains. That's a 50-mile trek, one way, carrying logs that weighed hundreds of pounds. Why build a 30-foot wide road just to carry a log? You wouldn't. The supergrid was an engineering feat that defies practical logic. Using LiDAR and soil DNA analysis, researchers have found that these roads are over-engineered. They don't curve around obstacles, they go over them. They climb vertical cliffs using hand-carved staircases. In many cases, these roads lead to nowhere. They just stop at the edge of a canyon or point directly toward a specific mountain peak or celestial alignment. The DNA of the construction materials tells an even weirder story. By analyzing the chemical fingerprint of the clay and stone, we know that people were bringing materials from all over the Four Corners region to contribute to the Chacuan megastructure. This implies a level of central planning that matches the dynastic DNA we found in room 33. This wasn't a build-as-you-go village. This was a premeditated, master-planned, religious supergrid. Some theorists suggest these roads were actually spirit paths designed to facilitate the movement of the dead, or perhaps high-speed communication lanes where signal fires could transmit messages across the entire basin in minutes. When you stand on the edge of the Great North Road, you realize you're looking at a civilization that had mastered logistics on a continental scale. They were moving mountains, both literally and figuratively, but you don't build a highway system that perfectly straight and that massive just to move corn and timber. So what were they actually bringing in from the deep, dark jungles of the South that required this level of infrastructure? The chocolate connection. While the DNA in the burial vaults proved who was in charge, it was the DNA found in the trash heaps, the ancient midden piles, that revealed who they were talking to. If you were an elite member of the Chacoan dynasty, your life wasn't just about survival, it was about the high-stakes flex. For years, archaeologists suspected a link to the massive empires of Mexico. But it wasn't until scientists ran chemical residue tests on Chaco Canyon pottery that they found the smoking gun, theobromine. This is the chemical signature of cacao, or chocolate. But here's the thing. Cacao doesn't grow in the high deserts of New Mexico. It grows in the tropical rainforests of Central America, over 1,200 miles away. This means that while the commoners were eating corn and squash, the elites in the great houses were sipping frothy, spicy chocolate drinks that had been transported across 1,000 miles of hostile terrain. But the chocolate connection was just the beginning. Recent genetic testing on feathers and skeletal remains found in the canyon has confirmed the presence of scarlet macaws. These are bright, tropical parrots, native to the humid jungles of Mexico. The DNA didn't just show they were there, it showed they were being bred there. This is a level of biological control that is frankly insane. The Chacoans were essentially running a high-altitude tropical aviary in the middle of a desert. Why? Because the color red was sacred, and their ritual DNA required the presence of these sky messengers to connect with the gods. The idea that Chaco Canyon was the northernmost hub of a massive continental trade network. They were trading turquoise, which was the blue gold of the ancient world, for the exotic luxuries of the South. Some radical theories even suggest that the Queen line of Room 33 might have had ancestral ties to the Maya or Toltec elites, creating a bloodline bridge that spanned North America. It paints a picture of a world far more connected than we ever dared to imagine. A pre-Columbian global economy where ideas, genes, and luxury goods flowed as freely as the wind. But as this empire of chocolate and feathers reached its peak, something shifted. The connections began to fray, the trade routes went silent, and the society turned inward. When the luxury stopped flowing, the rituals changed, and the DNA tells a story of a society descending into a period of terrifying darkness. The Dark Winter. This is the part of the story that most textbooks try to gloss over because it's messy, it's violent, and it challenges the peaceful farmer archetype. But if we're looking for the reality, we have to look at the Dark Winter. As the Chacoan system began to buckle under the weight of climate change and social unrest, the DNA evidence takes a turn into the macabre. At sites like Cowboy Wash and other outlier communities, archaeologists found something that sent shockwaves through the field: processed human bone. For a long time, the C word, cannibalism, was a taboo subject, but modern forensic DNA analysis has provided a definitive answer. Researchers found human myoglobin, a protein found in human muscle tissue, in coprolites, which is the scientific term for fossilized human waste. This wasn't just a theory anymore, it was biological proof. But the real angle here isn't just about survival. It's about social control. The DNA doesn't show a society that was starving in the traditional sense. It shows a society using extreme, ritualized violence as a political tool. The victims weren't the elites from Room 33. They were often outsiders or people from the fringes of the empire. This suggests that as the turquoise lords felt their power slipping, they may have turned to a reign of terror to keep the population in line. Imagine a dark winter where the drought has dried up the corn. The macaws are dying in their cages, and the elite priests are performing terrifying rituals in the kivas to appease a sun that refuses to bring rain. This wasn't senseless violence. It was a desperate attempt to reboot the cosmic order. The DNA reveals a society under such extreme pressure that the social contract didn't just bend, it shattered. This period of ritualized terror explains why, when the people finally left Chaco, they didn't just walk away. They burned the great houses to the ground as if trying to cauterize a wound. Survival is one thing, but as the society fractured, the survivors turned their eyes from the blood on the ground to the movements of the stars, seeking a way to time their escape from a dying world, the astronomer kings. If you think the Chacoans were just reacting to their environment, you're missing the most college-level mind blow of the entire site. They were masters of time itself. The Archaeoastronomy Code is the theory that the entire canyon was designed as a giant stone computer meant to track the movements of the heavens with 100% precision. The most famous example is the Sun Dagger on Fajada Butte. It's a series of stone slabs that allow a dagger of light to pierce a spiral petroglyph exactly at noon on the summer solstice. But it goes way deeper than that. The Chacoans weren't just tracking the sun, they were tracking the 18.6-year lunar cycle. This is a complex celestial wobble that most modern people wouldn't notice in a lifetime. Yet the great houses are aligned to its extreme points with an accuracy of within 1%. Now let's tie this back to the DNA. Why would a society obsess over a 19-year moon cycle? Because knowledge is power. If the queen line of room 33 could predict exactly when the moon would rise over a specific mountain peak after nearly 2 decades, they weren't just leaders, they were gods. The Archaeoastronomy Code suggests that the elite DNA was curated to produce a class of astronomer kings who held the keys to the calendar. The supergrid of roads we talked about earlier, many of them align with these celestial events. The DNA of the society was essentially encoded into the architecture. They were building a physical map of the sky on the desert floor, creating a sanctuary where time itself was under their control. This allowed them to coordinate massive festivals, trade meets, and labor projects with the precision of a Swiss watch. But even the most advanced star map in the world can't make it rain. While they were looking at the moon, the Earth beneath them was dying. The question wasn't if the collapse would happen, but when their celestial calendar would signal that it was time to leave. In the year 1276, the void began. We know this because of the DNA of the trees. Dendrochronology, the study of tree rings, shows that for 50 straight years, the Southwest was hit by a megadrought so severe it makes modern droughts look like a light mist. The corn stopped growing. The reservoirs dried up. The supergrid became a highway of dust. This is where the 1276 void becomes a detective story. When you look at the archaeological layers from this time, you don't find piles of bodies from a war. Instead, you find ritual decommissioning. The DNA of the buildings shows that as the people left, they carefully placed sacred objects in the center of the rooms, sealed the doors, and set the roofs on fire. It was a massive, coordinated cleanse. They weren't fleeing in a panic, they were closing a chapter. The DNA analysis of the ash shows that they used specific types of wood to burn the great houses, ritual woods that symbolized an ending. They were killing the buildings so that no one else could use their power. It was a biological and spiritual reset. The void isn't a mystery of where they went. It's a testament to their agency. They chose to end Chaco. They saw the drought as a sign that the 330-year turquoise dynasty had reached its expiration date. They left behind the chocolate, the macaws, and the bloodline vaults, and they walked toward the horizons they had been mapping for centuries. The void was actually a doorway, the modern awakening. The Anasazi mystery is officially over. DNA has finally shredded the myth of the disappeared civilization, proving they never vanished. They simply evolved. Recent genomic sequencing from the cryptic Room 33 reveals a staggering truth. A single matrilineal dynasty ruled Chaco Canyon for over 330 years, maintaining an ironclad grip on the Southwest's religious and economic power. But the DNA also tracks their tactical exit. This wasn't a panicked collapse, but a deliberate rebranding of a society. The people realized that the centralized, rigid power of the turquoise lords was a systemic failure. They chose to abandon the elitism and ritual violence of the great houses for the sustainable, community-focused life of modern Pueblo tribes. By weaving ancient genetic markers with living oral traditions, we see the real angle. Chaco was a high-stakes laboratory for human governance. The people didn't disappear. They walked away from a broken empire to save their future. They aren't ghosts. They are still here. What do you think of the discovery of this great empire? Leave your thoughts below and subscribe to the channel for more videos like this.